So welcome to the January 24th session of the Phoenix Congress, where we are writing a blueprint for a better America. Today's session is the third of 21 public hearings on the 2022 legislative package, and we'll review sections 116 and 117. The legislative provisions include ending military equipment donations to law enforcement and also prohibiting law enforcement from engaging in sexual acts with those in their custody. These sessions will alternate between Mondays and Thursdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern through March 28th. For those following along at home, you can find a link to the legislative package in the description below or at bit.ly/capital B, capital B, capital A, lowercase, Dropbox. If you'd like to submit a question in the chat, please indicate which of today's sections it applies to. And if you'd like to offer questions or other testimony for future hearings, please use the link in the description below. Before we get going, I would like to recite the preamble of the Constitution of the United States of America to help give us a framework around what exactly we're trying to do here. So, very short, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Fantastic. And with that, I'd like to welcome the delegate from North Carolina's 4th District to continue his testimony on the blueprint for a better America.
Thank you, Mix Chair. For the record, my name is Brian. I'm an organizer with the American Union and a Phoenix Congress delegate in good standing, representing what's expected to be North Carolina's 4th District in the 2022 election. And today we're going to talk about sections 116 and 117 of the Blueprint for a Better America, starting with section 116, repealing the 1033 program. And you've probably heard about this program by which the United States military gives surplus equipment to local law enforcement. This is a program that started back in the 1990s as the war on drugs was sort of ramping up. It was decided that the best policy was to ramp up the drug war with military equipment. And so they started offering the sort of deal that you might see on a late night infomercial. It's all sorts of free stuff. Local law enforcement just has to pay for shipping. And that includes equipment like grenade launchers, mine-resistant armored troop carriers, all sorts of guns, ammo, explosives. They have hundreds and hundreds of different categories of things that it's free, just pay for shipping. Of course, there's no such thing as a free mine-resistant armored personnel carrier. Someone ultimately has to pay for this. And so another way to look at this is a big subsidy for arms manufacturers who sell their equipment to the U.S. military and gets paid for through our, was it this year, $768 billion defense budget, and then turn around and give these things away for free to local and state police departments. In general, this program has contributed to the militarization of the police. If I give my son a hammer, he's going to want to treat every problem like it was a nail. And as we have given away billions and billions of dollars of equipment to police departments, they have become more militarized. We've seen over the last 20 years, we've seen increases in the number of no-knock warrants, SWAT raids, and even the number of deaths by the police have all trended upwards in the last 20 years. And so if we want to build a better America that looks for peaceful ways to solve our problems and reduce the amount of police militarization, the thing to do is to repeal this program. In fact, a June 2020 survey found that a majority of Americans supported ending or repealing this program, with only 17% wanting to expand it. And so this year, the legislation is very simple with dealing with this program, because all it does is it strikes Chapter 153 of Title 10, the United States Code. In that chapter, it strikes Section 2576A and just wipes the 1033 program off the books. In the 2020 blueprint, we had proposed putting restrictions on it, limiting the types of guns and ammo and military equipment that could be sent to local police departments. But we left some exemptions for some things. Problem is that there's a couple of problems with that. One is it leaves the door open, and this is the door that's better closed. And it goes back to sort of the question of, well, why would the military be buying things that they didn't need, or why would they be giving away things that are are still useful? So as we look for ways to trim the military budget, one of the ways to do that is stop giving things away and instead use what they already have. So the Section 116 of the Blueprint for a Better America will just repeal this program in its entirety. There was a little bit of debate this year in Congress about what to do with this program when the National Defense Authorization Act for 2022 came up for debate. There were 4 amendments that were proposed, one of which would have repealed the program, one which would have temporarily put it on hold, and then a couple that would have scaled back what sort of equipment would be allowed to go out. But the simplest, easiest solution is just to repeal this program completely. According to the ACLU, close to 10,000 jurisdictions have received over $7 billion worth of equipment over the last, since this program has been in effect. And it's important to note that not all of these jurisdictions were real. In 2017, the General Accountability Office, they did a sting operation. They invented a fake law enforcement agency, threw up a fake website, gave a fake address, and they started getting equipment from the Defense Department. And no program is going to be perfect. There's always going to be some problems. But when it comes to shipping out military grade equipment and weaponry, we should have really high standards for who gets those kind of things for free. Just pay shipping. And so instead of trying to clean up the program, instead of trying to trim it back and scale it back, let's just repeal it. And that's what this legislation does. A couple other things. I guess it's important to point out that this repeals the giving away of military surplus. They're still allowed to sell it. So if police departments decide that really what they need is a mine-resistant armored personnel carrier, they could still buy a surplus one. But that would encourage police departments and other law enforcement agencies to be a lot more mindful about the equipment that they were adding to their department. I guess I also want to point out that fire departments are under a different section. Nobody's complaining about the militarization of the fire department, and so the military can still send them surplus equipment for free, just pay shipping. And there's also another section of the law that allows the military to give away military animals, dogs, horses, mules, and donkeys, and that would still be in place under Section 116. So that's the gist of it. I mean, we've all seen over the last few years, especially, just the images, the pictures of militarized police. on our streets, often for peaceful protests. And it just contributes to the sort of imagery that we're painting for our children of what's appropriate. And military equipment on our streets. I mean, that's the kind of thing you see in like, dictatorships or third world countries, or you see in North Korea. It's not something we need to be promoting here in America. Just as importantly, we don't need to promote the idea that a military solution, excessive violence is the way to solve conflicts. There are many examples, and we'll probably talk about them next week when we get into no-knock warrants, about how these kind of things just escalate situations between police and citizens, whereas where they could be de-escalated. So the way to do that again is stop putting excess military equipment on American streets. And Mr. Chair, I guess that concludes my testimony for Section 116, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have a few questions. You mentioned that currently they're just paying for shipping.
Yes.
By repealing this law, military could still sell the equipment. If police departments are already willing to put forward the cash to pay shipping, I mean, if you repeal this, but the military can still sell, I mean, could the military sell for just really, really low prices that effectively make the repeal meaningless in the first place?
That's a good question. I would have to check into that for you. I don't believe so. I think it's still you got to sell at a reasonable price, or maybe there's a bidding process or something. Let me see if I can find that out for you.
Okay, yeah, I think
And
there should be some kind of, if we're gonna do it, let's do it, some kind of restriction.
Yeah.
But also, didn't President Obama end this program?
He scaled it. He put an executive hold on it, and scaled it back. This was after the protests in Ferguson, and so yeah, he scaled this program back. But as we've talked about before, the issue with doing things by executive order is that the next executive can come along and undo it, which is exactly what happened. And President Trump reinstated the program while he was in office.
So President Biden could put an executive order right now to suspend it, but it would not be permanent, correct?
That's correct. Yes, and the proper solution, Congress is the legislative branch, and so when it comes to policies like this, the proper course of action is for Congress to act on all, as we've talked about, on qualified immunity and all sorts of things. And so that's the goal of the Blueprint for a Better America, is to force Congress to act on these issues, so that they're resolved in a proper constitutional manner, instead of just being tamped down through executive actions. So I pulled up the section of law real quickly, the section 2576 about the sale, and it doesn't really appear to say exactly how that process works, whether it's got to be at fair market value or anything like that. So off the top of my head, I can't tell you. That might possibly still be a loophole where they could sell things that dramatically reduce prices to local law enforcement. However, I guess, in my experience of working on, when the state and county level is, when you actually have to start spending money versus just paying for shipping, people tend to scrutinize those things a little more closely. So a mine-resistant armored personnel carrier that might go for $1 million or whatever, even if your city could buy it for 10% of the fair market value, The people who make up the budgets might, like, is this really the best use of $100,000? And so hopefully that would at least bring some more scrutiny. But yeah, so we could look a little more into that, I guess.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, section 116 is assigned to the subcommittee on the George Floyd Justice Act. You may proceed to section 117.
All right. Thank you, Mixed Chair. Section 117, titled "The Prohibition on Engaging in Sexual Acts While Acting Under Color of Law." And this comes from the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They call this section the Closing Law Enforcement Consent Loophole Act of 2021. And it raises question about who can consent to sexual conduct while in custody. And the inspiration for this, the act originally came from a case where an 18-year-old woman in New York City accused 2 officers of raping her. And they argued that she had consented to it while handcuffed in the back of their squad car. And those officers were eventually, were fired and disciplined. But there was no restriction on those officers asserting that she had consented. And the Huffington Post reported last year that after New York changed its laws in 2019, 34 states still allowed for this consent defense. And so Section 117 would close the Law Enforcement Consent Loophole Act. And this really, raises larger questions of who can consent, who can give meaningful consent. What does that mean exactly? Is it possible for someone who's incarcerated to meaningfully consent to a sexual relationship with one of the guards? It's possible, but it certainly raises a lot of other issues, like what happens if the incarcerated person wants to withdraw their consent later on, where guards have the ability to control large aspects of the lives of the people in their custody. It's really hard to say what is meaningful consent. And so in other areas of the law, like age, we've said, children under a certain age cannot give meaningful consent to sexual relationships with adults. And that same sort of principle would apply here when someone has lawful authority over you, to say you cannot give meaningful consent to participate in sexual acts. The courts have kind of taken a mixed position on this. Some lower courts have recognized this as sort of being, could be a violation of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment kind of thing. But the Sixth Circuit, Eighth, Ninth, and 10th Circuits, they have all ruled that there is a consent defense available in allegations of sexual assaults. And once again, the courts and the executive action body can take actions, but it's the legislative branch who should really provide clarity and clear up what is the position of the United States. How do we protect people in custody? And that's what this section of the blueprint is. It aims to do. I guess we'll go into a little more detail about what exactly this does. And so there's a whole section under Title 18 dealing with sexual offenses. And so there are already a number of restrictions in place for people who are in custody. And the prison rape reform, I'm messing up the acronym, the Prison Reform Education Act back in the 90s also addressed a lot of these issues as well. But as the case in New York City identified, there was still a big loophole for people who were, who had not actually been convicted of a crime yet, people who are under arrest or otherwise detained or incarcerated. And so this section 117 will broaden the umbrella of people who are protected by this by adding the phrase or otherwise acts under the color of law. So if you're asserting your lawful authority over a person, then it would be a crime to knowingly engage in a sexual act with another person that is under your custody. And in line with the existing law, it would allow for imprisonment of not more than 15 years or a fine. There are some defenses that are currently allowed. Specifically, there's a marriage exemption, but this would sort of override all of that and very explicitly say that in a prosecution, it is not a defense that the other individual consented to the sexual act. So this would establish very clear federal law that says consent, would get rid of the law enforcement consent loophole. So actually the George Floyd Justice Act introduced a new loophole for sexual contact as opposed to a sexual act. These things are defined in the United States Code. A sexual act is defined as skin, physical contact, skin to skin contact between the mouth, genitals, or anus of two people. And any contact other than that was not included under the definition of a sexual act. It was just sexual contact. And the way that the Closing the Law Enforcement Consent Loophole Act was written, it created a new sexual abuse crime, but then didn't apply the prohibition on sexual contact to that. So it created a sort of a new loophole. And so in preparing this section for the Blueprint for a Better America, went through and updated and correct that and closed that loophole so that again, to protect people who are in custody from someone being able to assault them and then claim that they had consented. So that's the changes that it makes to the United States Code. And like many of the other sections of the George Floyd Justice Act, there is also a financial incentive for states to apply these same laws. And so once again, beginning in the 2025 fiscal year, states or other units of local government who did not prohibit this consent defense would not be eligible to receive funds under the COPS grant program. And so they'd be incentivized to explicitly make it a criminal offense for any person acting under the color of law to engage in such sexual contact or any sexual act with any individual under arrest, in detention, or otherwise in the custody of law enforcement, and prohibit a person charged with such an offense from asserting consent as a defense. And the section would also require that there be a report to the Attorney General each year about the about any cases where sexual misconduct by a person acting under the color of law was reported during the year. So there'd be a reporting requirement as well. Yeah, overall, this is just goes once again to the larger goal of trying to humanize people in the judicial system and protect them from abuse of authority. And this section would do that. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think that concludes my testimony for section 117, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, I have a question. It sounded like you'd said that you had redefined either sexual contact or you redefined a term. Is that correct? In the legislation?
So I didn't redefine a term as much as put the new criminal act in a different section of the law, so that it would that the prohibition on sexual, the way the law is written now, it spells out exactly what the sexual acts are that are prohibited. And then there's another section that says, well, if sexual contact would have been a sexual act in these scenarios, then it's a penalty. And the way that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act wrote this section of law, the sexual contact penalties didn't apply because they only applied to enumerated sections. And when they created a third one, it didn't apply. So by tucking the offense into one of the existing sections, then that protection relating to sexual contact does apply. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're saying before there were like sexual contact was excluded in some cases, and it's now been adjusted so it's always included. Is that a way to understand it?
Yes. The way it was proposed for adding this protection for people acting under color of law, they proposed making it a separate offense. And by making it a separate offense and not including it under the sexual contact statute didn't point to it. They created a loophole. So
Okay, just closing that loophole.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Let me see. Okay. Hello, Yantir in Twitch. Glad to have you here. We are doing a public hearing about a legislative package for the United States. So we have no stance on Germany here. But I don't see any. They're seeing no further questions. Section 117 is assigned to the subcommittee on the George Floyd Justice Act. I'd like to thank the delegate for his testimony.
You're welcome. Thank you for the questions. I know not everyone enjoys legislative minutia as much as I do, so I appreciate you asking questions to help clarify some of this.
A heavier topic in the latter half for some too. That I know.
Yes.
I was thinking about this. We should have put a content warning at the beginning. We'll look out for that next time. The next session of the Phoenix Congress will be held on Thursday, January 27th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern on sections 118 and 119 relative to no-knock warrants and cash bail reform. This hearing is adjourned. Brian.